so lucky. I had, in the rehearsal room, there were 3 model boxes of different shows. Brilliant. Brilliant. So they came back, and I got them into teams. So there was a designer, someone technical, lighting, sound, in each team. Stage management, DSM, all the rest of it. And I gave them their model box. And they all had to imagine that they were doing Romeo and Juliet on that set. And some of the sets were, steps galore. They had to try and reimagine how that they would create an accessible production, thinking about a cast that definitely had a wheelchair user, definitely had a deaf person, a blind person, definitely had someone else who had a mobility impairment. Some of the stage management team were also deaf, blind, mobility impaired. But how's that going to work? That's what you need to talk about. And they talked, and they talked, and they talked, and then they presented. And everything was possible. And they just said, it's about common sense, isn't it? And of course it is. It's common sense. And I was talking to the chief executive of here yesterday, Stuart. What's his surname? Somebody help. Stuart Murphy, yes. And he was saying, there's a huge drive here at the ENO to really think about, equal number of women on the board, equal number of women as creative, having BAME, deaf and disabled people as part of the structure. He said, I can't imagine what it looks like. I said, well, you can imagine it. Because if you look out there, deaf and disabled people are part of society. We are. But we're so sidelined that people don't think we're part of the norm. But it's when places like here, the National Royal Court, when you all start thinking about it as the norm, it will change our lives forever. It really will. I saw the Magic Flute. Oh my God, it's amazing. I'm a little bit in love with Simon with Bernie. I really am. And I love the fact that it's captioned, heaven for me. My only gripe, and I will be talking to Stuart about this, is the Magic Flute's got lots of that in it, hasn't it? Lots of talking. So suddenly all the singing, gloriously captioned, and then talking, no captions. Oh, what? It would have been so easy. So the half of it I couldn't get access to. And my best friend's got about 5 signs, or she's got more than that. She's signing away, trying to help me to keep up. And I do sort of know the story. And I just thought, someone has just not thought that through, have they? And I'm not the only person. So, the opera's got lots of older people who come, who are losing their hearing. So captions would be amazing. Also for people who have English as a second language. Captions serve a lot of people, not just deaf people. Sorry, I'm going around the houses. I told you I would. Just thinking about Graeae. How do we choose a play? We choose a play that I want to direct. I'm the artistic director. So recently I've just done Blasted again. I did it the first time with Maris many, many, many years ago. It was great, wasn't it? We had a laugh. It's not one of those plays you can have a laugh with, but it's just thinking about the access from the moment we choose to play. I have to think about me as a deaf director. How am I going to access my own work? That sounds a bit poncy, sorry, but that's what I have to think about. How is access going to be right for the actors? How is access going to be right for the audience? It's there, it's in the fabric. The minute we start the conversation with the designer, that designer will know that there will be somebody physically disabled, deaf or blind in the cast. They know that. So they have to start their design process with that in mind. Production managers know that access is not something that's just tagged on. It's absolutely permeated within the whole aesthetic of the design, the well-being, and everything. I just can't imagine not doing that. I really can't. So with Blaster, we did it at RADA. And so 3 RADA students and three profoundly deaf actors who use sign language. And I didn't want it captioned because I wanted RADA to really see how sign language exists as an equal, full language alongside spoken word. I said, but we have to have it captioned. And I said, well, why? Not all deaf people sign. But I don't want, for this production, I don't want the captions on the script, at the back. We did it last time, we had it all projected, didn't we? We pre-recorded all the sign language. For actors, you know, they have to be absolutely on the beat, so that the signing the film they would have to follow the film. And I kept saying to my then actor Gerard, who's visually impaired, Gerard, you look at the screen for that cue. Jen, what about being visually impaired do you not quite understand? I can't see the screen. Sorry, Gerard. Oh, right, okay. But great conversation, because I had to rethink about how do we cue him. So Jenny, the other actor who played Kate, it was just sometimes just a squeeze. She'd clock and just squeeze him so he'd know to slow down or double squeeze, speed up. So it was like a carefully choreographed dance, actually. The set that we had, I remember my production manager for that wasn't you? You were the stage manager, weren't you, Mary? Simon Sturgis is the only production manager I've really worked with. He is God. And Simon, I hope you're watching this, because you are God, you're amazing, but he's brutal. I hate him sometimes. He will not allow a design to go through unless he absolutely believes it. So I have to prove it again and again and again that we know what we're doing. And then I go, okay. And I say, Simon, I hate you. You've made me sweat blood and tears. But he will push me and our designers to push all the different nuances of accessibility, because he knows how to, because he's worked with me for so long now. And this set, for the first time I did Blaster, was not accessible for Jenny. And I designed it. And she said, Jen, I can't get up there. It was this beautiful slope. And I said, no, you're not meant to. She said, well, it's not very accessible. I said, no, it's a character of Kate. Ian he is the, you know, the brute. He can get up there. He's playing status with you. You can't get that up there. You keep sliding back down because of your mobility impairment. That really pushes your beautiful vulnerability. I said, but at the end, you will get there. And then when he's in the bed or blind and all the rest of it, she crawls right to the end, pulls herself up and sits on the edge. It's her world. So it's about looking at those, look at people's different physicalities to dictate how you design, how you can use that to not just inform your design, but inform the character. And David Toole was our soldier. David has no legs. But my God, he's got arms. And he could just scuttle around the set, you know, with such prowess. Is that how you say it? Mm. Again, we made that set work for him. So it's about who's in the room when you have the dialogues about the design, who's in the room when you talk about costume, when you talk about the sound. And sound, for a deaf person, is very, very important to me. But I won't hear it necessarily. But a designer has to talk to me about every single layer that they are creating so that I know that it's happening, and I have to trust it. And that's another thing that I love about Graeae, the level of trust and that beautiful word compromise. You know, compromise is a brilliant word, because you're compromising on whose terms are you compromising on? Why? And when you start to level it out, something grows from that, and a whole new world opens up, possibilities. But that, again, is because we want to try and understand and make something that's aesthetically beautiful, but is accessible to deaf and blind audiences and to my deaf and blind cast members. So other things that we have used in the past is reasons to be cheerful. The audio describer is not a separate voice. Pickles is on stage, a guy called Pix. He's on stage with his DMs and his things, his Ben Sherman shirt, and he's on a 70s payphone. So the sound designer created 2p pips going in, the pip pip or whatever it is. So we'd have the money going in, and Pick is talking to blind audience members on the phone. So when things go wrong, as it does in live music stuff. They're getting first-hand stuff about what's happening. And all the other cast members are like, oh, yeah, I'm wearing my little pussy helmet, I've got my hair all up, I'm doing this. The actors come and talk to the audiences. And on that note, one of the things I really am proud of is we do a preamble for blind audience members, which is the designer talking about their set, and then the actors introduce themselves, and they will talk a little bit about their own physicality. Then they will talk about their character and what their character is wearing. Serve two purposes. A blind audience know about the real physical diversity and the communication diversity on stage. They get to hear the voice, so when they hear that actor on stage, they can place them. It means actors own what they wear. I get so fed by actors, I feel like, oh, thank you, that's nice. Your designer has gone to a lot of work to think about what you're wearing. Not just a costume. So when they have to describe it, they understand it better. And I do this because one, I can't remember her name now, I think I blanked it, but she wrote in the Independent about one of my actors having a beautiful head on a grossly deformed body. So you can imagine how my actor felt when she came into work when we were doing peeling at Soho. She's broken. Absolutely broken. And I thought, nobody talked about my actors like this. Nobody. So we describe who we are, and that information goes to the press, and that information is also there for blind audience members. So I've gone on. To this day, I have not met this person. I've got her name, I'm not going to out her. But it's just, you probably see in the papers that there's so much crap written about, people make such judgment about disability. They still use the word handicapped. There's still a lot of learning to be done. And it's, I've been at Graeae for nearly 22 years. That's a long time to be somewhere, isn't it? But I'm still learning, that's the thing. That's the thing that's so brilliant about Graeae, is that every so often something comes along and I think, oh, I have no idea how to do this. Let's have a go. We do it. We did there's a massive show, which Zoe was our stage manager for. This Is Not For You, which was on at the Woolwich Barracks. Wounded veterans. Kirk was in it, our film man over there. He played one of the brothers. He was beautiful. It was an extraordinary piece. And it was a modern contemporary opera. We had a volunteer choir. And the designer said, Jen, I've got to make the choir box accessible. I said, yes. She said, we are going to try and find choir members who are wheelchair users. I said, yeah. Brilliant, she's on it. It costs more money to have the ramp. It was and make sure the ramp's the right, gradient and all the rest of it. It costs more money. Graeae is a tiny wee theatre company, and over a third of our budget goes on access. And we had it captioned, we had it signed, we trained up one of the guys to be an audio describer alongside Pickles. We had to do that. A, because we believe it, but B, that's also why we're funded. And it does upset me hugely, as you can imagine, where organisations have so much more money than we do, and they don't think about access. It doesn't even come into the conversation, those initial conversation with directors and writers and designers and all that. It's not there. But they've got the money to do it, and to do it a lot better than we can do it. And it upsets me, masses, because it's so easy, and it's so interesting, and it really challenges you as an artist, and I think it really challenges you as a production manager. So when I did Blasted at RADA, the stage management team, oh my God, amazing. It feels like the theatre world is in very safe hands, knowing that they will be out there in the big wide world very soon. But Alex, our production manager, he said, right, Jen, what I've set up in the theatre is the blue light. When the blue light flashes, that means we're stopping, so everyone knows we're stopping. I will come on and make sure I've got an interpreter with me and I'll sign why we've stopped. Okay, yeah, carry on, Alex, I'm liking this, hello. He's got so many things in place. And I never even asked him. I go into denial when it comes to tech. I hate them. I get so nervous. I feel very deaf in the tech. But that tech was the nicest tech I've had in a long time inside a theatre because he was on it. And the staff actors felt very safe, fully informed, and it made the whole thing go so much more smoothly. And he just said to me, well, it's not rocket science, is it? Oh, no, it's not. He said, it's just that easy, but you've just got to think about it. And so I think that's all I really want to say is just, if you don't know what it is, ask. You know, I love coming to talk to people. I love problem solving. And, you know, sometimes within the whole thing around access, it's about problem solving. You can't just chuck money at it always. You problem solve. And from problem solving, you find stuff. And just thinking about the captioning here, I was very lucky I was in a box. Because my friend works for Classic FM, so she gets some nice little treats on her +1. So I was on a not a bad level just to be able to read the captions. But they are very high up, and the action's down there. So it's just, it would have been so easy just to have the captions there. And when I went to see Harry Potter, you know, I paid about £3 million for my tickets. And the captions are like either side. And so the deaf lot, we were all sitting there watching the first half, to give our necks a break from that side, and all the magic's happening there. People go, oh, and we go, oh, I've just missed it. And then the second half, we sit there, watch the captions there, and I think, oh, what have I spent all this money for? It's really annoying. And then, you know, when you put the interpreters on the side, you're watching an interpreter, why aren't they part of the fabric of the piece? It's so much more interesting. And directors say, Jenny, it's distracting. Well, when I went to see Fader's Love, another Sarah Kane play, it was the old Arcola, which was very, 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 like, long space, wide space. And the interpreter was, like, right over there. So all the deaf were, like, looking right over there. And, you know, every time the C word happened, or the F word, or any swear word happened, the whole hearing audience would look over at Jude to see what she was signing for that. Brilliant. And I said, that's distracting. If she had been in the territory, hearing sighted people can filter her out if they want to. But it gives me that opportunity to see who the actors are and have her there. It's theatre, that's what we do. So we shouldn't just go for the easy peasy option, bang them on the side. No, that needs to stop. And there's enough really brilliant theatre interpreters who are also actors who get it. They have a real stage presence. Use them. So I will shut up because I'm about to get onto my high horse about all this, and this is not useful for you. But just know that if you need any support or thoughts, or I'm just jenny@graeae.org. And I'm more than happy to continue this conversation and to help, because we need real accessibility, and you are the people that can become like a stuck record within your organisations to make it happen so it becomes part of the DNA now and forevermore.
Thank you very much. It might be a very good idea to move on to Jonathon now to talk about the caption glasses and the way that that's changing the way shows are captioned, and you get to watch the whole show and watch the captions simultaneously. Perhaps you could explain.
Yeah, problem solving, the whole idea of the glasses, and just generally the quality of access provision in theatres stemmed from the personal challenges of someone who, kind of my investment in it, stems from the personal challenges of someone who'd Chichester Festival Theatre, who'd booked a hotel, driven from quite a long way to come and see a show, arrived there, and I think it was an audio description performance, something failed. They'd made all this effort to be there. They'd had maybe 1 or 2 chances in the production run of a show to actually experience the show with audio description, and we'd failed, and it was a technical failure. And kind of people were, if I'm generous, mildly concerned, but really a little bit ambivalent about it. And so the standard, we had to improve the standard there by making sure that there was always technical support and that the equipment was really, really robust. And then when I came to the National, I mean, obviously it's the National Theatre, it's one of those organisations that has a bit more money than Graeae. And kind of, and it wasn't the same, but it was, you know, there were still technical challenges, and there just wasn't this sufficient sense of how important it was specifically for the individuals involved. And it was increasing the quality of that and the standard of the technical support and ensuring that it was always on technical support. It wasn't on call that could arrive 10 minutes later or 5 minutes later busy doing something else. You had to be there. You had to fix it immediately, because that was the only standard that was acceptable. And then that kind of evolved into another conversation just about the provision for access and raising the bar. And it's kind of, so there's this brilliant, I think, correlation between, certainly in terms of deafness, people getting older, they're losing their hearing, they're also getting slightly wealthier. So when you go after access money, they tend to be slightly wealthier. So when you go after access money, particularly in the arts, a lot of the people who offer you money to support access provision are people who have got a certain amount of hearing loss themselves. And so at Chichester it was kind of easy to find some of that money, and then it's obviously really, really appealing because at the National Theatre to find that kind of money as well. People are really, really keen to support access. But the way this project evolved was from some work we were doing with Stage Text, who, to Jenny's point about having the screens out here, you know, why would you pay £100 to see anything if you're just going to be reading the screen? It's pointless. And it's kind of, it's tricky territory because it's, the decision about where the screens go is one that isn't really in the hands of the people who are going to be using it. It's always in the hands of someone else. And that someone else is driven by whether or not it'll impact on the nature of the performance for everyone else or for people on stage, and it just isn't good enough. So integrating it fundamentally, contemplating integration at the front end of the production process, you know, in the rehearsal room, on the first day, in planning, in white card, whatever, is really, really important. And we're sort of starting to do that a little bit at the National. A little bit. Not enough, but a little bit. But what Stage Text did, what Nesta funded project in 2014, was to evaluate, and it's going to be extraordinary, the results of this, and you will all be amazed, evaluate what would happen if you moved the screens closer to the performance. And you will not be surprised to hear that the closer the screen was to the performance, the more immersive the experience was. But of course it's still just a great big screen, and the technology doesn't move on. And because it's theatre and it has other priorities, and because times are always tight, there isn't a lot of money for this sort of stuff. There's not a lot of money for technological innovation in theatre, not enough money, not nearly enough ambition in that area, and certainly not enough ambition in terms of developing systems using technology to improve the audience experience for those people who have hearing loss or sight impairment, or any other kind of disability. So we took this project we were evaluating the efficacy of that, and we were also looking at some speech following software that was being developed by a kind of genius called Andrew Lambourne from Birkbeck University in Leeds. He is now, and I have to say that whenever I say his name, but actually at the time he wasn't. He was working for someone called Screen Systems. But it seemed really like an awesome idea of having an automated speech following system so you could have more caption performances, and on the basis that we were thinking about open caption performances. But while we were doing that, we were also talking to Sony about some glasses they created to use in their Regal cinema chain in the United States. It's about 600 cinemas. And we'd been to Reading and we tried their glasses, and then we really wanted to start to fiddle around with them, but they wouldn't let us inside into the magic. So they were quite guarded about it, and so we dropped that and we did the rest of the evaluation, and then it kind of went quiet, and then Stagetext decided not to carry on with the project, and then Andrew Lambourne came back one day, I think in an email, I can't remember what, and he said, what about if we get the old band back together? And so we kicked the project off again at the National Theatre, and this time we went out to a new world 2 years later. Technology had evolved, and augmented reality systems had sort of started to emerge, and they weren't all called Google glasses because Google had scrapped their project, and then there were companies like Epson and Microsoft had developed this bonkers thing called HoloLens, and there were a number of other products that we got Accenture, who I'm contractually obliged to always mention, who are the National Theatre's partner for innovation, to do some in-kind work. They're like a tech consultancy, kind of almost everything consultancy, kind of let's do magic stuff company, and pitched the idea of taking the speech following software and linking it to augmented reality glasses, and they were like, okay, that sounds great, let's do that. So they did this 10-week sprint, as they call it. It's all kind of corporate terminology, which I'm very acclimatized to now. And they did this 10-week sprint of going out to the market to look for augmented reality glasses. And I think we found about 9, 10 and 12 pairs, different systems, some of which looked amazing, but they were really well-made photographs and websites. And when you ordered them, the lead time, it was probably 14 weeks, but it was actually forever, because a lot of them never even materialized as products. But Epson created these glasses. So we just went through a process really with Accenture of seeing what we could do with the glasses in terms of what we could display, trying to make a really crystal clear form of, effectively, it's like subtitling. I don't know who of you have experienced it, but it's like subtitling. But we wanted it to be clear, we wanted to give people options. So with Accenture, we developed an app inside the glasses, because it's a bit like a mobile phone you wear on your face, and it has kind of options in it. You can have the text in a number of colours, you can have it any size you want, you can have it anywhere you want it positioned on the screen. You can have one line, or you can have 3 lines, which is a convention that's been developed from open captioning, so that you can just kind of read at your own pace, and you're always there or thereabouts. But the whole idea of it, and the work that we did with Andrew, was to try and give everyone a kind of equitable experience. And that is, I call it the button point in every sentence. And that's trying to, which is kind of impossible because everyone reads at different speeds, but trying to make the laugh moment, the applause moment, the crying moment, whatever it is, the same for everyone. That's like the marker. And we fiddled around with that for ages. And that's all in the speech following software, which is, I'll tell tales of the first time we tried it. I can't remember what the show was. Can you remember?
Two-hander, wasn't it?
Yeah. I boldly invited Jenny, and who was officially the guinea pig for the project, and she came to the first. So we did a year of testing. So from October 17 to October 18, when we eventually launched them, we did a year of testing, and Jenny came to the very first press night because I said, right, from press night on, it's going to work. It's going to be brilliant. Come along. Jenny went, all right, then, as long as there's wine. She sat there, and I think it was a pretty short show. It was about 90 minutes or something. No, maybe it was 2 hours.
It was a short play, thank God, because it got stuck on one line, didn't
Yeah,
it?
I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that.
Sorry.
I'm rowing it. But what she did, because it did get stuck, like pretty soon after the beginning, I think. But Jenny sat there, I think, pretending it was working all the way through, all the way through the show, and only at the end of it fessed up that it hadn't worked. And I ran to the bookshop and got her a copy of the script, because it was. But you know, that was the beginning of a year-long adventure, and it had its car crashes all the way along. You know, there were moments where it was absolutely appalling, because it was speech following software, so it listens to the sound. It's better with a radio mic show because it's clearer audio, but it listens to the sound and it follows the intonations of the sound and the sort of fragments of audio, and it uses that and then OSC cues from lighting and sound and automation systems to create like a composite lifetime code, which it then uses, which we then reference against points in the dialogue, all of which is expected. I'm not giving nearly enough attention to the side of the room, sorry. Which it all expects, obviously, because it's not in a sort of fairly conventional play. So we tag these together over the course of about 3 shows, and then we broadcast it in an automated way after that. So, and we try to make it as accurate as possible. And at the moment, it's pretty bloody accurate, actually, amazingly. But there have been moments where it was catastrophic. Including just before, about 5 minutes before the press launch, when we had a massive Wi-Fi crisis, which everyone involved in the project aged about 50 years in about 5 minutes. But what it does is using the sort of build part of it. You have technical build and you have a captioner, and together they build the file, and then it just runs. It runs every night. You just turn the system on, and it listens to the audio. And it uses these cues and it runs. So at the National Theatre, 2 weeks ago today, for the first time, all 3 theatres had automated captioning, closed captioning, as we call it, broadcast on the glasses, and we've increased, it sounds like advertising because it really is, but we've increased the number of caption performances from 5% of all the performances to 80%. And the only reason we can't do the rest is because theatre making, as you will know more than probably anyone else collectively in the world, is such an organic process. And we can't tie it down because it makes it cost prohibitive. But even that isn't really enough, frankly. So we're now talking to Google about integrating their speech recognition system into it so that we can start to try and give a not really nearly as good or accurate version of the system, but be able to broadcast using the speech recognition software.
That they needed to be at first nights, they needed to network, they needed to be with their peers, and they couldn't, because that was never the accessible show, because it was always it was always going to happen halfway through the run.
Well, I broke the promise, effectively, because I promised Jenny that, because she sat at the theatre show, or I can't remember what it was, she sat on stage, which is kind of the spark for this, and she said I remember it quite distinctly because she swore, which is so unusual for her, and she said I get invited to so many press nights I can't go to, and it drove her nuts. So although she was the guinea pig, she kind of earned it because she was also the instigator of the whole project, because that just isn't good enough. And I've broken the promise because she doesn't get to come to the press nights, but she can come a couple of nights later. It's close.
But that was press nights. That was and it was. Spot on the glasses. It was. Oh, I would have it. They're so good. Love them.
There's a series of 8 films called Heads Up, which is produced by the Creative Case for Diversity, the Arts Council's initiative. And one of them focuses on the new Wolsey Theatre in Ipswich, which I know, Jenny, you're in that film speaking, about Sarah Holmes. And you have said that she understands diversity like nobody else, and she embeds it in everything that she does. I was wondering if you could speak about that. That's a good example of a venue that addresses accessibility from the very beginning of every day.
I think New Wolsey, Sarah and Pete invited one of Graeae shows to be there, and it was from that we were there for 2 reasons. I think it might have been White in the Snow, which was our show for young people, which was about genetics, Snow White story, and stuff for 7-year-olds. It was quite a tough play. But we talked a lot around the accessibility of the show itself, the writing, how it had been written with access in mind, everything. It shows that we should all be doing this, shouldn't we? And she is one of those people that's a bit like Jonathon. When she's on a mission, she goes. So she's made sure all of her staff regularly have sign language classes, disability awareness training. You know, Pete and Sarah will both talk to the designers that they are working with about how do you implement accessibility into the production. They now regularly employ deaf and disabled people into their productions, which are nothing about disability. Mind you, most of Graeae shows aren't about disability. So it's become it is absolute part of their DNA. And Sarah was telling me that the 5 different reps were going to do a play each, and then they would rotate. You know, that's quite a good economical model of a way of working. And she said that, I said, well, can you talk to all those reps and dare them to have at least 2 or 3 deaf and disabled actors and designers or whatever? And she went, I will challenge them. And then she came back, she said, no, actually, Jenny, I think what we need to do is something bigger than that. We need to do one great big show a year with a real inclusive cast. Really think about how we could develop new talent, backstage talent, new directors, new choreographers, new sound designers, all of it. So Ramps to the Moon was created. Is it Ramps to the Moon or On the Moon, Ali? On the Moon, I was going to go somewhere. Ramps on the Moon. So that was created with 5 reps, 6 reps in Graeae. And it's really had everyone's mind about possibility, glorious creative possibilities. So West Yorkshire Playhouse just did a live audio description in their production of Road. So they're all trying it out, and it's brilliant, because it's really, really working. And they are suddenly getting more deaf and disabled audiences, because that is the invitation. Like Jonathan's saying, you know, these classes are there. The deaf people go, oh, we are welcome now at the National. You know, if you're employing deaf and disabled people, oh my God, someone like me's going to be on the stage. Brilliant. It's very, very simple.
Do we have any questions from the room? Or any, Pip, do we have any questions from online?
Yeah, one. What do you look for, this is for Jenny, what do you look for in regional theatres when you are touring, also devising tour shows?
Well, we always do an access audit and talk, if there is some complications around accessibility, again, glorious problem solving, and that's exactly what New Wolsey realised. You know, their backstage is quite tight, but they've built other ramps and they've had a new accessible bathroom put in. So they're making big changes actually, as well as small reasonable ones. The thing that I would always look for more than anything is that the venue wants Graeae there. It's attitude. You know, if someone just like, oh, we've got to tick a box, we need to have, you know, let's get the quips in for one night. I can sense that attitude a mile away, and I'm not a tick box exercise for anybody. But if a venue generally wants our art and a good piece of theatre, and they're genuine collaborators, that's what I would look for. The access, we can sort it out, if you know what I mean, practical access. So that's, yeah, attitude is everything.
Have we got any other questions online for now? Any questions from the room?
Okay. Anything you'd like to add, either of you? And we might bring this to a conclusion this session. Sarah Holmes had a very nice comment in that Heads Up film, which was, I don't want anybody to have free access or to, I want anybody to have free access and to be themselves and to not have to make compromises or ask for assistance or ask for special concession or for us to be thinking about special concession, just for it to be how it is. And I think that's what we would like to do when we design venues, when we work in venues, when we design shows, when we make shows, when we engage our staff and our performers. So it's embedded throughout.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Jonathon was saying about, Stage Takes is an extraordinary organisation, but they get so frustrated about not being able to hang their lighting books or the stage text books where they think is the best place for the deaf people. A lot of the time it's directors saying, oh no, it'll spoil my look. But if it's part of the design concept from day one, it's not going to spoil any look. And I was just thinking, I saw, oh God, what's that play about critics, killing all the critics? Improbable did it. Oh, what's it called?
Theatre of Blood.
Yes, Theatre of Blood. So the caption machine, I think it was part of the design, but it was right on the stage. So sometimes when the actor was standing right by it, it looked like the words were coming out of their mouth. It was brilliant. I thought, that's what it needs to be. And even, the Harry Potter, the words could just be floating in space, right in the middle of the stage. Genius. Why did they put... Oh, God, I want my money back. I did talk to Jack Thorne, and he was really upset about it. So was John Tiffany, because, they are also directors and writers who really embrace accessibility. And I have had, Jonathon and I, over wine, we tend to have conflict, it's healthy conflict, because I will always still argue, don't let signing and integrated sign language, don't let that go from theatres as well. We need both, because, we do. And I think the glasses will advance in that way when, what did we say? We had maybe I can't really remember because we were very drunk. But we had a conversation about whether the glasses can become more interactive. Could you remember?
So we've just got some more funding to to investigate development of British Sign Language in the glasses, either as a video or as an avatar version of sign language, to hook that up to the same system and have them. So good news, kind of. It's not the same, but so demanding, quite rightly, and also to add audio description to it as well. So it's still going to evolve, and I think there are other technologies. I mean, my anxiety about, particularly on behalf of stage text, is that you can't develop this kind of service outside of the context of a live developing theatre space. Stage text spun out of the industry, I suppose, and then it can't really exist on its own out there. It needs massive support in order to evolve the technologies, and I think that's the danger for me, and my experience in this is that you create a technology, you solve a problem, and then you stop, and it's captured. It's a moment in time, but with technology advancing at the rate it's advancing, it's so applicable to solve any number of access challenges. Oxite are a company who have spun out of Oxford University, and they've developed a system using the same glasses that we're using, the Epson Riverios, and they are giving sight back to people who are not completely blind but have tunnel vision and different, I think 96 different types of loss of sight. So there are extraordinary things happening, and we need to never think that it's an afterthought and it has to be solved after the production. It should always be thought about at the front end, and it should always be, we should embrace anyone who's trying to solve access challenge in any form of entertainment. Attitude is everything, and stage text, and everyone who's doing this work, and support them in any way we can.
And we haven't even really talked about, some of the physical accessibilities in some of the older theatres in and around the West End in particular. I don't know how we solve that, but there must be some ways in which we can increase the accessibility, especially for wheelchair users. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I remember having a conversation with someone at the Haymarket Theatre. I said, well, why don't we just put the audience on the stage, because the stage was accessible, but the auditorium wasn't, and we do the acting in the auditorium. Just flip it. Not for every show, but why not try that once, so that a mobility impaired audience has for the first time some access to see that theatre. We need to be breaking rules. Not National Heritage Trust, because they're killers if it's not to do. but you know what I mean? We just need to be braver.
Question for Jonathon. What's the plan in terms of giving other theatres access to the technology, or as a product? What's the thinking about?
Well, we're just what we didn't know about the glasses. I mean, we're trying to build a business, kind of a little tiny business out of it. So, obviously, the National Theatre's role is to make theatre for everyone. That's our mission statement, and our job is sector leadership as an organisation. So, it is our job to, when we develop something like this, is to share it with the subsidised arts sector. And to be honest, we're talking about that. We've now, as Jenny was saying, the glasses are now being run in a test environment at Leeds Playhouse. There this week, and I think they're going to be there for another 2 weeks. And we're bringing in cast in Doncaster and Opera North and to create a little kind of cluster up in Leeds to evaluate the glasses. And we're doing that for nothing. We're just doing it with Leeds Playhouse. And we would like to offer it up to other theatres, but we just didn't know whether anyone would use it, so we've kind of been reticent about it. But we've now done 240 performances. We've had 240 people use the glasses since November last year. 37% of them weren't even on the access list of the National Theatre, and 10% of them had never been to the National Theatre. So, although it's not many people, like 28 people or whatever it is, they had never been to the National Theatre. And they are, so we have a responsibility to share it, because now we know that it can make a difference, not only in terms of accessibility, but people who stopped even contemplating coming to the theatre. So and we're just modelling out how to do it in a way that's really affordable, because it's not expensive, but we're just fumbling around trying to figure out what people are going to have to pay for it in order to sustain it, and also bring a bit more money back in so that we can continue to develop it and then roll out the next iteration of it. Because I kind of see it like an app, or like I dread to say like an Apple Mac, because it's a nightmare these days, the amount of updates. But it is like keeping it fresh all the time, offering new bits and pieces to improve the experience as often as we can. So we're going to share it, but we also want to get it on West End shows and give people access. And as Jenny said also earlier, it's not, for people for whom English is their second language, it's massively helpful in comprehension.
Just on that, there's a very good organisation called A Different Engine, which you can download onto your phone, but you need someone to press it for the caption to come up. But they're a very small outfit based in Coventry, but they are brilliant. And I've got a very good friend called Stephen Lloyd, who is in Reasons to Be Cheerful. He's a brilliant young man. He set up his own company called Amplified, and they do stuff in the vaults and stuff, and he makes sure that every single performance is captioned. He types it all in, PowerPoint, which is how I started with Graeae. We used the PowerPoint, we still do actually, and he will sit every night and do that. They've got no money, but he believes in access, and it breaks my heart that he hasn't got any money. He can't even pay himself, but he does it. We need more Stephen Lloyds in this world, we really do. So it's dead easy. Sorry, I'm completely wiping over your glasses there. They are brilliant, believe me.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, everybody. We're going to take a short break now for 15 minutes. Then we'll come back and we'll have production managers here and we'll talk a little bit more about the detail of what we do as part of our jobs. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank enormously Jenny and Jonathon for coming and spending their time and being so generous with us today. So thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. We've got a change of faces here. So first of all, we've got Mekel Edwards, who is with Lift Festival and other things.
Yes.
Many other things. He's just been bragging about it. And then we move on to Andy Franks, who's Venue and Estates Director for Mountview, and Dan Shelley, who is the Technical Manager for BAC, Battersea Arts Centre. Jenny left it on a nice note just now, talking about we haven't even touched on accessibility of venues and wheelchair access and so on and so forth. So Dan, perhaps you'd like to kick off with the redevelopment of BAC, because this is at the forefront of what you're doing, isn't it?
Yes, the redevelopment, and also leading on a project called Changemakers. The BAC at the moment is trying to become one of the first relaxed venues in the UK. So that means everything is completely accessible to everybody all the time. So not just having relaxed performances once every so often, but making sure all performances from our small fringe venues like the committee room all the way to our massive rooms, which like Grand Hall, which got redeveloped, opened September last year after being burnt down, unfortunately. And as part of that, we're trying to make it accessible, all being led between the BAC and Tourette's Hero, who are a company led by Jonathon, who has Tourette's, and trying to make it accessible to all disabilities. So not just physical, but also mental, and so ranging from blind to also bipolar and everything like that. Which has had its struggles, because obviously the BAC is a Victorian building by trade, and it's, we've got small archways, we've got a thing, and trying to make that accessible for wheelchairs and also people who have disability access, but also for blind people, for deaf people, and trying to make it accessible all the time. It's not just on specific occasions, which has been part that I've led from the production technical side, which it's had its challenges, especially trying to make everything accessible. And it was also considered when the Grand Hall was being rebuilt, because it's been completely redeveloped. New roof, new everything made wider. So the fact that now our dressing rooms, which used to be on a floor in the Grand Hall, have now been lowered, and they've also got disabled toilets and showers and everything. So each dressing room is accessible for everybody, which I think is very good.
So were you part of that design process when they were?
No, I've only been at the BAC 9 months. So I was a freelancer back when but no, in the last 9 months I've taken over a project called Changemakers from PIP, and we've been trying to make everything accessible. So it means we do captioning, we do audio described, but also trying to use kit means we're not fortunate enough to have loads of money. So part of the process that I've been involved with is trying to use existing equipment that we've got. So stuff like, can we use a plasma TV for captioning, or can we use projectors, or what can we use? What do we have to hire in audio description equipment, or can we just use lapel mics with headphones, or how we can make that and adjust those to fit into the situation? I mean, it doesn't have to be the FAS, you have to spend some money to make everything accessible. It's just figuring what you've got in-house then to use them to make it accessible. But then it's also using them in the design process from earlier on. For like BAC, well known for the process of Scratch, which is a company will come in at the start and will have an idea for a show, and it's about getting those ideas about accessibility from the start. So like if they can incorporate captioning or audio description or sign language, or how many other ways to make it accessible for other people.
And is that part of the remit of what you set out?
Yes, and that's, I think it's now near the end of it. We're now near the end of Changemakers, which has also been funded by the Arts Council. So it's now come to the end. It went through the...
I was just going to say about the festival that you're running.
Yes, better get into that bit. Thank you. I might as well go into the festival now because I've lost my train of thought. So at the moment we're currently in a festival called Rest and Resistance, which is being led by the BAC and Tourette's Hero. And it's a 2-week theatre festival about accessibility and everything that. So we've currently got Rebels Ball tomorrow, which is a load of different acts, all different types of different disabilities, and making that accessible for everybody, the wheelchairs and everything like that. On the weekend beforehand, we had Comedy Without Victims, which was a comedy show with a bipolar musician, blind comedian, all with different disabilities coming together and basically making a comedy without victims. They're all, in the end of the day, turning the piss out of themselves, which I think is a fantastic thing, and being able to make everybody else realise that you're not, I'm trying to figure out the word this. But
it can be a positive part of life.
yeah, and that's the whole message. It's about making it positive about people, realising that this isn't meant to be a struggle. making everything relaxed, and accessibility isn't it's meant to be easy, and it is relatively easy once you get into the, and it is easy once you get into the mindset of it.
And do you find that you've got to have much staff training, or you've got to change awareness amongst staff members, or was there quite an easy buy-in right from the beginning from everybody?
I think because of the nature of the Battersea Arts Centre, I think there was a very easy buy-in. There is everybody, because we are a fringe theatre, and everybody bought into it. Everybody buys into it instantly. Everybody loves the idea of the fact that we're making everything accessible, and that's fantastic. It means I loved it. It means I love being part of this project, and it's been great because everybody just does it naturally. It's not a thing that we've had to force or had to change a lot. It's just making sure that we can do. Means we try and do it from the day to day.
So it's part of your makeup then?
Yeah, it's part of our makeup.
Andy, you're a venue and stage director at Mountview. What were you before?
I was director of production, or production director. Background's production management in shows, but for quite a few years I headed up the technical training team for Mountview. And then about 2.5 years ago, I was dragged into an office and they said, Andy, we're just about to build a new school. Would you like to change jobs and build a new theatre? And I went, oh, let me think about that. Yes, go on then. So then I became venue and estates director. And completely opposite side of the coin, I've got a brand new toy to play with. So we've just moved from North London down to South London, and we have just built a £28 million building that includes studios, as well as cafes, as well as restaurants, as well as 2 performance spaces. 80-seat theatre studio and a 200-seat theatre main house theatre. And actually, there's not many times you can actually be right at the beginning of a project and be able to design it or be part of that journey of designing something right the way through. So I was the client-side project manager, is for the one of the title, which actually meant there was quite a few key things. Because obviously in a modern building nowadays, it's going to be accessible. You know, you have to do the access audits and you have to do everything else. However, it was quite interesting how the access audits were only about people moving around the public spaces, only about people moving around the kind of atriums and the things. And so when we started talking about the backstage areas, when we started talking about the fly floor, for instance, there was no knowledge, there was no kind of advice, there was no guidance of what you should have in place for those areas. So it's quite a challenge in a way, getting the design to be adapted from a typical theatre design in order to make it accessible. We've managed it. We have managed the accessibility in the backstage areas, in all areas. So it has its compromises. For instance, the fly floor is quite wide. However, that means that the flying distance is a little bit shorter than we probably would want it, but it means that it's completely accessible. Verita is the studio theatre. The gantry is fairly wide, but what it means is that actually anybody with access need can actually use those spaces, can technically use those spaces. We looked at the height of the grid and how you would rig a light if you had access needs, and it's all accessible, apart from maybe the 6-metre grid right in the middle of the room, but that's something we'll crack with suitable access equipment. And it was kind of, you had to drive it. We had to constantly drive to remind people. There was one point where there was 3 steps up to the fly floor, and also there was several steps onto the gantry around the studio. And everybody was like, that's all right, it's only 3 steps. And you kind of go, no, it's got to be flat, it's got to be flush. There's got to be no steps. So the gantry is a little bit higher than you would normally have in a studio. So therefore we had to think about how we would do the lighting. And yes, the fly floor, it sort of changed the height of the building because the flying heights and where the cradle sits now. And so it really is detailed work in order to make it accessible. But as I say, I'm quite welcome to show anybody around. And there is only one place. I mean, we have a tension-wire grid, that's accessible, and we've put plans in to make sure that actually anybody can work on the tension-wire grid. Is the actual grid itself. It's a loft grid, and it has got several steps up to it. But we've worked out a scheme in which, should we have a student or an employee who actually, predominantly a student, we want to give them the experience of being in that area. And therefore we've put a plan together already. We haven't opened the theatre yet, in order that a student could quite easily appreciate the height, appreciate what it feels like to be in that grid. Whether it's practically as a working environment, that's something that we would need to work at. So it has been a really interesting project. And from the talk this morning, earlier on that we had, we actually realised we've cracked it technically, but actually, we do 26 public performances a year. The building is a public building now, rather than just a drama school. We have 200 this high children from our community academy. We rent out spaces to Zumba on a Thursday and various other things. We have commercial operators, and so we're very accessible in those things. But we've kind of missed a trick on some of our performances, and making some of our performances accessible and relaxed and whatever. And my colleague Liz, who was here today, and we had a quick conversation after, said, right, building operations meeting, top of the agenda for the next meeting is how do we bring that in? Because we've concentrated on making it accessible, we've not concentrated on the product we're producing in order to make it accessible.
Yeah, I think that's the difference, isn't it? We all think accessibility is about wheelchair access and 1 metre 10 wide and all the rest of it, but actually it's a great deal more, and Jenny was, hugely inspirational in that conversation. In the Live Festival, how does this, is this part of your thinking as well, in your plan as well?
Very much so. In terms of what we do at Lift and in the Lift Festival, we bring work from different parts of the world to the UK. So often we get work that may have come from another part of the world that actually disability is not a thought of or a thing that is come as a tailor-made package. And often what I find and what I have to kind of do and think through is how, when we get this piece of work, how we can adapt it to make it accessible. And amongst that, the challenge of the venues that we also go to, because Lift does venues all over the London, but also outdoor spaces, space that you would not normally not use, spaces that are not normally event spaces, and it's just putting together all what is needed to make it completely accessible and make it a place that everyone can come and take part. Like for example, we did it's kind of almost like an immersive away day for a very, very top organisation. I'm not going to name, but very big organisation. And what we had an artist who was in a wheelchair, and although the thought of what we do in the performance and how we do it and where we place it was all thought of, the backstage space, the accessible toilet was thought of, but was just a porta cabin in the middle of a grass area, and no thought of how do you get to the porta cabin. And there was wonderful lush toilets, clean, beautifully clean toilets for everyone else, but the porta cabin wasn't maintained. And it's just what I find is a lot of the time organisations don't quite think of that small detail and don't quite think of actually, we've ticked a box by putting the porta cabin, disabled porta cabin in there, but we actually thought of how they get there and what is in place to do that. Same likewise with the backstage space. There were steps going all the way up to it. There was no way of putting that in together, and no one kind of thought of that at the time. And obviously Lift wasn't we wasn't in charge of the whole project, so we didn't, for example, hiring a porta cabin, so on and so forth, but we was given a space to use, and we found that quite valuable. And actually, in truth of it, the organisation actually have come back to us and have asked to do something similar again, but this time on access for their staff team, because I think they identified at the time actually that is something that they need a bit more of a heads up on and a bit more training on. But yeah, I mean, it's always that battle. It's that battle of you getting a show that is kind of tailor-made and has toured the world, and actually when it comes to the UK in whatever way it comes, we suddenly there's that battle of, well, we need to really think about how we can implement this here and how we can change this here and how we can put this so it is accessible for all. And it's always that battle of finding the right time in the schedule to fit in. Actually, when do we install accessible, if it is an accessible performance, when do we install the infrastructure to that, and that needs to take paramount. And I think there was a very good point that actually the conversation of that needs to happen from the model picture, from the get-go. Yeah. It needs to be incorporated, it needs to be thought of way in advance of just when it's been made, it's been designed, it's now in place. Oh, by the way, we have a performance next week that is going to be captioned, and then suddenly everyone's thinking, how does that work? Yeah. And I think it's just that understanding and realization that actually this is important, and it needs to be paramount and forefront, and it needs to be accessible for organisations that can't afford it also. I've been in situations where I used to do a lot of work for almost 17 years from when I was a kid with Haringey Shed, which is another, again, mixed ability organisation, and they often struggled to be able to afford some of the things that would help the process a lot smoother, and often had to PowerPoint, find a PowerPoint, find a projector, and make it work that way. And it's about just in budgeting, in terms of funding, in terms of accessing what it needs to make that happen is always the afterthought. And venues is always the afterthought. And I know I mean, from when I first started to now, venues have jumped milestones in terms of what they're trying to do to make it accessible as much as possible. But sometimes with a new building, it's put in, and over time it's just not been used, and it's not been utilised, and people forget, and staff change and don't know quite how to use it. And I think we have to take responsibility for updating the knowledge of it, and updating the knowledge of technology and using it. And not just having it there that was put in at the beginning and we can't afford to fix it or we can't afford to maintain it. Yeah. And that is challenges that I often find when I'm all over the place on ways to make it work.
And off-site and is particularly challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
Massively challenging.
Oh, yeah.
And I suppose what we've all learned from today actually is that it's not just about what the audience experience and how we get the performance on stage, but it's also we need to start those conversations. We've got the authority to start those conversations right at the beginning of day one, at the point where somebody says, which play should we put on? And that's the point where we need to start talking about accessibility in all sorts of areas. You know, if we're talking about backstage areas as well, we're talking about welfare and facilities, we're also talking about working hours and how long can people work and how often do they need a break, and is there a quiet space, is there a breakout space that they need? Very often we're trying to source rehearsal rooms at the last minute on a very tight budget, and it's really tight even trying to get them to be wheelchair accessible, let alone any of the other facilities that we need as well. So yes, it's one of those conversations we need to have with our directors, I suppose, very, very early on in the process, isn't it, which is what we've learned from today. We'll open it out to the room actually, because this is really just comes back down to production managers, team, and your experiences amongst you as well. So is there anybody here that's got questions or would like to share anything particularly, or any particularly challenging shows that they've worked on? Whether long ago.
I think a lot of it's down to a lot of things we're talking about. It comes to kind of producers, and you know, because often our job is facilitating things, and the kickback that you get from putting caption performance screens in the middle of the stage as a designer saying, I don't want that. You know, our job is to facilitate things like that, so it should come from people kind of above us and sort of producer, artistic direction level. That if you're going to go into the model box stage, you know, I've never been in a model box where I'm like, well, where's the caption box? Go in the middle of your set, because that's not, you know, that's a kind of the impetus should be from above us to designers and directors, because that's I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where the resistance often comes from.
Yeah.
You know, so it's an organisational culture, which is what you kind of have to change. And you're quite right. It's either from the bottom up by training the staff who are doing the work to think about these things, or it definitely is from directorship and board level in order to change the culture of the organisation and the way they think about things. I mean, we're a room full of problem solvers. I mean, that's basically what we are. And therefore, we try and solve the problems when they come to us. And it's, well, it's ideal there, but we can only put it there because of X, Y, and Z. And I sort of think about the creative ways in which we solve problems. I had a carpenter, and she was a student carpenter actually, and she was hard of hearing. And you kind of think, carpentry, hard of hearing? Well, that sounds a little bit dangerous. How do you stop somebody on a machine if you need to stop them? And it was a simple solution of a buzzer that she carried in her pocket, and the master carpenter had it, and if he wanted her attention, he'd press it, it would buzz in her pocket, she'd stop the machine, she'd turn around, and then they could talk. Very simple solution. And I think it's just how we can change the thoughts upstairs by actually presenting the problems, by saying, actually, you know, you're asking us to do this, we need your help to change these things. And I think it's very much
in a building, like, I've also never met any resistance to anything that's about access or accessibility. There's no one in my building anyway that's ever said, well, we're not, you know, we had a show here for I last year with a deaf actor, and everyone did sign language lessons and helped him implemented a thing. We had Lisa Hammond came and did a show with us, and she's quite short and in a wheelchair, so there was a whole thing, infrastructure put in place around that. And we've got a performer, one woman, Selena Salt. Anyway, actress coming in a month, so he has mental health issues, and she can't do 8 shows a week. So we've cut down the performance schedules to 3 or 4 shows a week, and the supervisor, if she's not mentally able to do the performance, we can cancel it. So we do, and there's never any resistance to that from a building point of view, but often if you have a freelance designer coming in, they want to make their stamp, they want to do their show, they want to do the best thing that they can. often that is not taken into account of their, you know, the beautiful design that they want to create.
But then surely that should be part of the conversation then. And it's like, I know just from picking up from the Battersea Arts Centre point of view, means it's now not just producers or anything like that. Now it's from David Jubb, our CEO, our artist director. It's all come from them. And it's like, he was talking yesterday. We had a talk at the BAC yesterday about relaxed venues and the BAC and Come On and all that. And he even knows how to start the lift if it was ever to break down. He knows how to do this, and I think that's and that's what needs to happen. I think there's a cultural shift, and everybody needs to so make everything more accessible. And it's not, and the fact that we have the ability, you know, from this forum today, to go to our own venues or go onto our freelance and start that. And I think that's an amazing thing to start pushing, because we need to start pushing it. I think a lot more to a lot of different women, make them realise there's no point. You shouldn't resist, because at the end of the day, they're normally easy changes. It's an easy thing to do, and I think we just need to make more people aware about it.
It's also a thing about etiquette and understanding of disabilities, and I think that Haringey Shed, for example, used to do loads of outreach projects and didn't quite get as much organisational outreach projects, which is actually what they wanted to do, which is actually going to organisations and changing everyone's perception of what disability is and how you work with someone who has a disability, and you're not babying them or making them feel like they're any different, or making it seem like it is a chore or an effort for you to be able to do that because of disability. And I often find when you go in some places that actually they don't have an understanding of what disability is and are aware of how you work with it and how you can easily overcome most of building challenges or room challenges. And so I think there is also, in terms of management and in terms of producing and so forth, there is a responsibility for organisations to buy into these workshops and these away days and training days, just as if you also do a staff away day, but also have an element of it which touches on disabilities and have workshops around it and so on and so forth. I think it's very important, and I think sometimes it's the cost, and so it's not quite as important as everything else, but actually it is paramount, and it does need to be taken into consideration. I learned so much growing up performing at the time, but in Haringey Shed, and doing stuff that I would normally never do, or be confronted with things that I would normally never take into consideration, and I've tried over the years to implement that in what I do going forward, because it is important.
I've been to Haringey Shed actually recently. I went and gave a talk to them recently, and they came and did a visit to us, and it was great. It was fantastic. Yeah, and went up and helped with the lights and did all sorts of bits and pieces.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a real mixed ability group with kids with special educational needs and all sorts. It's a really great group actually.
Yeah.
When we're talking about resources and about where we find out information from, I know Jenny just said, email me at any time. I was looking at the Graeae website, and they produce some really, really useful information. So they've got a quick guide, which is a PDF, which you print out, which is for front of house staff. And it's fantastic. It's about the what kind of logos can you need. Think about your venue. Think about venue accessibility, a language guide, and what terms you can use and what terms you can't use, because people get very nervous about what terms they can and can't use. So it's some very, very interesting access tools as well. Audio description, audio introduction. I love the bit that Jenny said before every show, every performer gets up, describes themselves, introduces themselves, talks about their costume, owns their disability as well, which is, she talks about this as well, and a tactile set interpretation, touch tours. So there's some really, really fantastic resources out there as well. Shape Arts is also a disability-led arts organisation, which is fantastic for resources as well. So, look online. There's a lot of support there, and there's a lot of people that I think that get behind us when we're having these conversations, when we're hitting up against producers and directors, and we're hitting up against those people that haven't yet sort of come over to the right side. And there is that backup and support out there, and lots of information that we can draw on, I think. Has anybody else got any experiences that you want to share? Have you got any questions?
Well, I just thought it was interesting when you say it's not about babying, and I think it's the same with actually every performer you work with.
Mm-hmm.
There will be, even if they're not obviously disabled, there will be some things they're not able to do, or there'll be something they're not comfortable with. You would always work on, actually, can you climb over this thing? And it's about talking to them and asking them what they need. And as an example, we had somebody come to do a cabaret on top of a set that was already designed, and they were in a motorised wheelchair. And it's about, we were looking at how can we get them on stage? Because everything was raised and everything was raked in lots of angles, and there was no way we could get the 1 in 20, and it was a big conundrum. And then just actually getting in touch, saying what kind of how do you want the ramp to be? And then they came back and said, well, 1 to 20 is sort of standard ramp. So what can you actually go up? Can you go up 1 in 7? Yeah. So then then it's not a problem. Then we make that ramp and they get up. So like you would with any performer, really. I think that's
Yeah, we had one recently where it was ex-servicemen, and the lift went down, couldn't get them to the studio theatre, and they're ex-servicemen and they're extremely strong upper bodies, and they were just like, yeah, we're fine, it's not a problem. Bumped down the stairs, bumped up the stairs, because they were, you can't assume that we've got to ask the questions. We've not got to be shy of asking questions, have we?
Yeah.
Of people's individual abilities and disabilities and what they're happy with, and listen. Actually, I think that's the big thing we've got today.
That was the best thing for me working with the young kids, because they're kids, so they just said what they want and said what they meant, and that was it. It wasn't sugarcoating it. It wasn't you spend hours trying to think and actually just asking a question, and they just said it exactly how they would want it to be, and I learned so much from them about that and doing that.
Yeah, just to jump in on that point as well, from assuming you guys might agree with me on this one, but our consultation process at Battersea Art Centre, since Jess, Tom and her team became associates with us, meant that we were all able to open up a lot more about what these taboo subjects were, whether it was about how to communicate or about how to edit the building, or about how to make our rehearsal spaces more accessible. But not just that, but also with our technical team. We did a couple of workshops on how do you tech a show with either deaf or hard of hearing participants, because obviously that's a much slower sort of tech process in terms of scheduling, and very sort of basic things that you just kind of quite quickly overlook unless you stopped and asked somebody with that experience, like how would you like to do this? And so that culture really, I felt, grew in the BAC, and now it's become the norm. It's become a lot more normalised, I think, for us as well. From experiences previous to BAC, from fringe world, I felt that the experiences I had was that the consultation process of having a technical eye at these challenges was left on the whole far too late, and that we were not privy to having those immediate conversations when discussing about a show, where it might go, if it's a tour, and the care of not only the artists but also of the staff. If you have any staff that have access needs, I once had a situation where I had a touring production with a stage manager with MS, and at no point was it consulted with the overall team about what extra support might be needed until you're out on the road and realise that one of your key members of the team is unable to lift and to load and to unload and to pack and to unpack. And if we had been in the conversations from the very first instance, we would have said, well, here's another budget line, we need another technician on this and support. This person can still do their job, but we need another support here. And it feels like there needs to be a slight more culture change in an artistic direction and producer level to rely on their production managers and technical managers to come in and give that advice. People always, I don't know if anybody else in the room has had experiences like that, or...
In the past, I've touched on by artistic directors and directors and producers and sort of seasoned creatives, so to speak, is that they're just not willing to hear rational reason even when evidence presented.
And it's just maybe a minor change, and not just venue based. This is all from freelance, from what I'm experienced in the past. But it feels like there is a culture change happening in terms of the artists themselves, which is fantastic. There needs to be also a bit more consideration as well for our teams, our technical teams, because we also have access needs. I wonder how many times technicians or stage management or production ever get asked if they are dyslexic, and maybe they need their prompt copies in yellow, or do you know what I mean? Or they need tinted screens. When is that ever asked? And is that the responsibility of the production and technical managers for a venue as employees, employers, or is that the sole responsibility of the staff member themselves to say, actually, I need a bit more help on this? So that it feels like there's a lot more conversation to be had in those realms as well, and not just the responsibility of venue.
And I suppose slightly on that is, people, if you go into a full-time job, you'd have filled out an application form that would have asked you on there, do you have any access needs? Whereas in what we're doing, you're often employing people, stage managers, technical staff, as self-employed people who haven't gone through that formal process and might not have been asked those questions. So where do you find the point that that those things get brought up?
Yeah.
I worked on a fringe show a while back where one of the actresses in the show, it came down to the first read-through, and she had dyslexia, and she was so scared that it was going to hold her back from getting the role in the show that she did not mention it until the point we were sat down to do the first reading with everyone from design team, the whole venue, and she leaned over to the stage manager and said, I need a different script, I can't use this. And suddenly there was this huge scramble, and in the end it was decided that no, she'd be fine, and we just carry on. And it was probably one of the most uncomfortable situations to be in, and I kept kind of pulling my director aside and saying, we need to stop, take a break, get this script in the right format for her. And that was an interesting moment of her going, I'm scared I'm not going to get this job, so I'm not going to say it till now. But if we had known, we'd been prepared for that situation, and we could have had a more welcomed for her and not had any issues. And yeah, it then gets this funny area, I think, but people want to hold back, maybe hide there is something wrong, because they fear that it may become an issue, and it ends up being an issue, and then how we deal with that.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we've got venues, and we've had venues represented today, and I work for a venue, and you have equality and diversity committees, and you have these forms that go out, and what are your needs, assess your working situation. But yes, a lot of us also are working on a freelance basis, and at what point do you ask that question? Whose responsibility should you ask that question? Is it the individual's responsibility? I tend to say no, it isn't. We should be a bit more thoughtful in that process. But no, and it is difficult because then the funding's different. A large organisation like mine, nationally funded organisation, it's part of what we have to do. So it's embedded in what we do, but it's not necessarily when you've got a freelance production just about to go out on the road. And yes, she was afraid of getting the job or not getting the job because they didn't have to tick any boxes. They can get under the wire.
But I think that also comes down to a bit of a culture change, I think, as well, not just from our side, but also from everybody's side, really. Because, like you said about dyslexic, I'm dyslexic. Anybody who ever receives an email, text, call from anything from me, I can't spell for them. I'm terrible. But it's kind of like, I told Jack, I was like, Jack, I am dyslexic. Anything, I'm terrible. But it doesn't stop me from doing my job. And I think that's a massive thing. You've got to realise the fact that, yes, you just need to either ask. I mean, I think you don't have to be, don't be scared for asking. I think that's a massive thing. Don't be scared. And for both sides, don't be scared to ask or don't be scared to tell anybody. I think that's kind of, because we end up in that culture then that we're too scared to ask each other these questions, and we shouldn't be. We should be able to ask these questions without any prejudice, without any malice or anything behind it.
And does that also come down to a clear job description? You know, as well, it's when you're engaging freelancers, are we being very specific about their roles and responsibilities? If you are a stage manager on the tour, are you going to be expected to do the loading and unloading? And if that's a problem for you, is that something that we can overcome? You know, is enough of that going on, I suppose, is my point. Are we being clear enough, or are we being too vague to try and get people in the roles and when we're under pressure?
I'd expand on that point and say that it is not, you were saying about your performer who couldn't necessarily do 8 shows a day, and she had a pause for it. She could pull a show if she needed to because of mental health reasons, and whether, I mean, that's a good step, but is it a case where we're possibly trying to run before we can walk, where we're saying that we're willing to make these, and we're willing to work with people that have got these particular issues, but not acknowledging the fact that working 70+ hours a week for an able-bodied person is not really going to be conducive to their mental health. And you know, are we getting to the point where we're saying, right, we'll address an issue if it's a recognised disability, but we're going to ignore the fact that there are some working practices that are standard that aren't really.
Well, yeah, I mean, this does bring in this therefore then affects 100% of everybody working in theatre, doesn't it? It's not those people who have recognised characteristics or disability.
Which could be
or an impairment.
could be positive, because if you've got somebody, let's say, who openly suffers from mental health issues, then we can improve the working practices of those who don't have outwardly mental health issues. But it's a question of whether it's ethically necessarily really correct to be kind of like, let's fix this problem as opposed to fixing a problem that affects everybody.
When you're talking about sort of devising a show, and we're talking about the kind of working hours that we do, if you've got certain needs with certain people in your company, you're going to build those in. You're going to say, well, can't work more than so many hours, or this person can't do more than 4 shows a week, they're quite elderly, or and you're going to build those in. But yes, no, you're absolutely right, because there's so many hidden conditions. There's so much mental illness which is completely hidden. There's fatigue which is hidden. There's broken families. There's lack of work-life balance. There's all of these kind of things which all need to be addressed. There was a really interesting article on the Stage this week, I guess everybody saw it, which talked about the toxic work environments that we all find ourselves in on occasions, and that there's this assumption that a 12 to 15 hour day is quite normal. It's quite a normal thing. Anybody that I talk to outside of theatre is absolutely horrified about it. But, and I thought it was really, it was great. You had the Association of Lighting Designers, you had BEC2, the Association of Sound Designers, the Equity and Stage Management Association, all of them quoted in that article, is kind of ticking every single box. And they all said, why is this normal? Why have we come to accept that this is normal? Because there is no work-life balance. And that's, I know, something that we're going to lead on to in the next forum, isn't it? Ollie Brown from Hull Truck is going to speak, and the next forum is at the 6th of June at the ABTT Theatre Show, looking at welfare in theatre roles. Hull Truck have just announced that they're going to be changing their production schedule. Is it rehearsal schedule or production schedules? They're going to go from a production, so they're going from 9:30 to 6:30 and not expect to do a 12 to 15 hour day all the time. Does that mean that we've got notes all evening, that the technicians are included in that process? Is that just the actors? But you know, Ollie will be here to talk about that more fully.
Sorry, can I just,
yeah.
I think it all kind of comes down to money, doesn't it? Really?
Yes.
Because like you have 28 million to build a new building, you should do all the things you want. You don't have 28 million to retrofit the bus.
I wish I did. That'd be amazing.
Sure, we did with Lisa Hammond. We were talking about the 1100 mil gap and all that to get, you know, she wanted more places for wheelchair users, and you know, you do your access thing. And our lifts are 850 wide, so you can't get 1100 anything over 850 in the room anyway. So we can't. We don't have the money to retrofit the lift, and then we've been doing 2 session days at the World Court for fit ups, and then people start complaining about the lack of money. They're not getting the overtime money. So you like there's the time off, but people want the overtime. And also they rely on the overtime money. So people, you can work 9:30 till 6:30, but it's like full-time staff at the whole truck are going to mess up on the overtime money that they rely on.
Which then talks about you know what we're earning, what our base earnings are as well. And then you know you do 4 days with 3 session days. That's 12 sessions. You do 2 session days. That's 6 days. So that's 2 days of a show that you've lost. 2 days of bums on seats. You know. So there's huge implications to how we work and the timetable to what we work and how fast we have to get up and running to get people in to start paying the bills as well. So it is a huge cultural shift, but
certainly freelancers as well. Like I've worked with a lot of freelancers who are like not drawn to, but certainly not detracted by 12-hour, 14-hour days. And I'm going to work here today, and I'm going to do an overnighter, and then I'm going to do it tomorrow, and it's going to be like incredible. And I'm going to make loads of money. Tell me like we've not met people like that, or been in those positions as well of like we'll work all night because you're going to make the money. And freelancers, there's no one really regulating. If I went freelance and decided to work like that, I could do that.
And it's not rare even that sometimes you'll find freelancers who will go from one job to another in terms of a day shift and then night shift at another venue because there's no, you know, there's nothing to monitor that, and that's down to personal, you know, free will, which is fine, until the fact that you are the venue on the receiving end of a contractor or a freelancer who is tired and therefore not entirely fit to do the job that you're employing them to do. And there's no monitoring of that as well on the other side, and that can have a very severe effect on mental health as well from being overtired.
Yeah, we've sent people home because they've come in and bragged about working all night, so we sent them home without pay.
Yeah, especially in big houses where you do have those overnight turnarounds and you have very, very tight schedules, and there's no room for things to run over, and it's very high pressure. That can be quite common.
I don't think it's even just big houses. I mean, currently the BAC means we've got the Grand Hall. I mean, we're turning that overnight get-outs all the time. I full well know half the crew have come from like the Royal Albert Hall or from other venues, because they're doing day shifts, they're doing overnights for us, finishing at 4 or 5 in the morning. Then possibly, sod's law, they're probably going back to like the Royal Albert Hall at 10 o'clock in the morning again to do another day shift. It means there needs to be a massive cultural shift, especially with like tiredness, mental health and all that. It means it's come to the forefront, thankfully. But yeah, it needs to be pushed a lot more, because it means we're all bad at it. Like, I tell myself off all the time, I'm doing a 6-day week this week. I should be actually taking my boss Jack tells me off left, right and centre for doing more hours than but he's right. I should be doing my contracted hours. I shouldn't be here 60 hours. I shouldn't be doing this, because the fact is I've got to look after myself as much as I look after my own crew. Because them guys do their hours a week and don't do any more. Whereas I will happily pick up those shifts because we're under pressure. And the fact is that we need to start looking at these cultural shifts. So we're not doing these 12, 15 hours a day, so we don't end up. But then you'll always go to the
home at 8 o'clock, you go, I'm going home early tonight.
Yeah.
It's so easily done.
But then with the BAC then, if you are doing this great change, becoming a relaxed venue, great access, as much you're doing that for the public and the people and the performers, is that actually happening as an internal within your employees?
Well,
does the same apply to your employees, as you just said? I sometimes do too many hours. Might be sexy. Is it for everyone?
Yeah, and it should be. It means that's completely right. I mean, that's probably a fair point you've probably brought up. We've probably not looked at production and technical. We've not looked at ourselves. Like, we've looked at everything else. We've looked at how it affects, the audience, the public, the producers, but we've not looked at production and technical. It means means we need to look at, and that's probably a fair point actually. And it's probably something that nobody else has probably done either. I'm guessing, because I know.
It's a similar thing we have even in the arena world, where we have just had an announcement for a major venue that we're going down from 40 hours a week to 37 and a half. But obviously we as a technical team will look at that and go, yeah, okay, that's for the office upstairs. That's not the cultural shift on the ground, because that would mean a whole other body in the team.
Because you can't cover the work.
Exactly.
And it's so easy overlooked. I mean, I've been in a venue before where I was the only technical person there and was running around like a headless chicken all the time and trying to be in 2 places at once and trying to make it all work at once, and it all again boils down to money, and it all goes down to employers and the people above the level 4s who kind of just know it will get done. So it's like, well, just do what needs to get done, and there is actually no overlook. I've often been tasked with things and I'm like, well, where's the money? It's like, well, a lot of people, Mekel, and it's like, well, I do need a budget. I can't just be putting it on my own back and my own resources and my own friends to make it work. And it's often it's just it all boils down to money and budgeting and putting the money in the right places. And there is organisations out there that do it very, very well. I've just come from a venue that actually have their overnight turnarounds and it's their normal thing, but actually it's done quite well. And there's a night shift, and there's a night crew and a day crew, and they often swap, and if you do a night shift, then actually you get the day off before and the day off after, and to rebalance your lifestyle and
We'll do a freelance gig.
so there is that there is models out there that do work, but then it all again boils down to money.
I think the word that keeps coming up several times with everybody is it's a cultural thing. It's a cultural thing, and it is perfectly possible for us to change our working practices across all the issues that we're discussing today, because you see it in other parts of the world. If you go and do a tech week and you send if I sent one of my schedules from here to somewhere in America, they'd send it back and there'd be some crossings out and we'd start talking again. And several places even, closer to home in Europe where, yes, you'll do a 40-hour week and it's tech week. So it can work and it does work. In the places that I've experienced that it works, they've had a longer rehearsal process and they've been on the set from day one, and it's absolutely that's a cultural thing. We do it in a smaller amount of time than a lot of other places that we go to. So, you know, it's adopting. It does work. We just need to observe how it works and slowly maybe start taking on those practices.
And sort of challenging from the bottom up. We're sort of veering quite a lot into what I know you're going to be talking about in June, which is backstage and welfare. But if we go back to the sort of accessibility, kind of wrap that up for the afternoon, unless anybody's got anything else that they'd like to say. But I think it's very much, just as we were talking about changing the culture, now as being part of the conversation doesn't mean that we can always make that happen this time, but maybe next time. And you just keep having that conversation, we keep pushing about informing ourselves. So that's not only in terms of working practice, but also in terms of accessibility and shows. And by the time you get the white card module, is that too late to be talking about where the captioning screen's going? We should be having those conversations earlier and earlier. And that might not change in the first couple of shows you work on, but the more we're shaming people into saying, but you've not thought about it, you've not considered it, when's that going to happen? Why isn't it on press night? Why is it only 3 weeks later? Why is it hidden away on a Thursday evening when nobody's going to go? What message is that giving to our audiences, or our performers, or our staff, or our creative teams? So it's not easy. This isn't an easy job being production manager, and I applaud you all. But and you're the ones that have to have those difficult conversations. And you get pushed from above, and you get pushed from underneath as well. But there are resources out there, and let's use people like Jenny and use those kind of organisations to try and give us some backup and give us some weight behind our conversations and the challenging that we've got to do to try and shift this on a bit further. So, if there's any other questions, anything you would like to say?
Yeah. So, I work in events. I work for an event company, and I just want to kind of ask about found spaces and what you found kind of lived, and how far do we think we need to go? How much accessibility do we need to provide? Because often or not, we will find a space that the client will love and adore, and like in one particular week ago we did a site visit, and they love this space on the first floor of a building with no lift access, with a very, very crummy old staircase, and the only toilets we can have are downstairs outside. And we've said, well, look, you've got to factor this in for disabled access, disabled guests. And they said, oh, we're not really expecting people like that to come to our event. So suddenly there was immediately a cultural block of
people
okay,
like that.
I won't say who they are, but they don't come from an event world. They want to put on an event, and they said that we're not expecting people like that to come to our event. So it was a bit of a first of all, how do we know that's not how it works? Suddenly there was a cultural block.
Yeah.
But then also, how do we then go, okay, now we're going to try and make this space work. This is something we do have to factor in. But where do you go with it? Because we could put in a lift, a wheelchair climber for the stairs. But do we get 1? Do we get 5? How many toilets do we need to put in? Do we need to look at every single bump, lump, small step? Where do you find with lift and kind of things like that? Where do you find that line is?
A lot of the time it's about finding the right space to start with. I think, for example, lift, one thing that I've kind of pushed on, especially for this year's festival, is to start looking at being very much involved in that venue picking, as well as not just I get a technical ride and I get given a venue and then I have to make it work, but actually where does this fit and how does it make sense there? So sometimes it's just about where the venue is, and sometimes you have to have that hard conversation. So actually, this is it. At the end of the day, they're your employers, and you often can get, well, if you're not going to make it work for me because you're saying it's not going to work like this, it could become a much more stickier conversation. But it's just about pushing and being aware and not just saying it, but costing up what it takes to do it. So say that's fine, but you do need to also be aware that you need to put in this to make it work. And you also need to have a pocket of money to be able to afford to make this to make it work. And we have to put in a ramp here, and we have to look at that. And often, sometimes, again, it's having a conversation with the venues and the spaces, because sometimes they have ideas or things they've done already ready to tackle those things. I've been to a lot of venues where they have a ramp that is pre-made for their 3 steps that is just in the back. And actually, I've gone in, I've think, well, I need to put a ramp, and I've thought over it, and then actually when I ask them, they go, well, we've got one. It's like, oh, great. So I've just spent 2 weeks trying to say, okay, we need to find the money to do this, we're going to put this in, and can I get your measurements? And they have one already made. And venues are especially event venues, are becoming more and more clever there. But also some are spaces that are not per se an event space, but do invite events of different kinds. They are also getting a bit more savvy and a bit more clever in terms of how they do it. So it's an open conversation. There isn't a right or wrong answer to it. There isn't a right or wrong answer to having 4 lists in comparison to 1. You often don't necessarily know if there will be someone with a disability come into your event or someone in a wheelchair come into your event or not. It's not a case of we expect that to happen, but it's something to take into consideration. And often it's what is the event? What type of event is it a closed event for set people? Is it a public event? It's those borderlines. But I think anything public, especially more so than anything else, you can't say we don't expect that to happen. It's not a question.
You can't necessarily build all things in for all people all the time.
Yeah.
It has to be an open dialogue, and I think we don't need to be as arrogant as to think that we can just layer on solutions all the time. There has to be people that with disabilities coming and talking, having people consult with us, having people come in and say this is not acceptable. You think you've done a really good job, but you really haven't. We need to take advice. We need to make sure that we're talking, we're having really open dialogues, and not be shy of having those conversations.
Yeah.
Like you said at Haringey Shed, you've got those kids that are really not shy with their language, and they're
not at all. and you would find
for help.
And you would find most organisations, like Jenny just said, email me. I mean, most organisations are more than happy, and won't in charge. I think there's also that thing of it's going to cost if we do this. Actually, you'll find that knowledge and experience comes from people like Jenny all the time, and it's just a phone call away. It's just asking their opinion, and you'll find that actually they have solutions to most of that thing. But again, sometimes just saying it won't work, and we at Lift, like I've started getting technical specifications for the festival next year, and part of my role now is to actually identify the right venues for it to fit in, as well as with the artistic vision and where the artistic director would like to put it, but also does it fit Mekel? That's the question I've been asked. Does it fit? Is it the right space for it? And often I've had events or shows come that doesn't fit in the venue, and I've spent half my time trying to make it fit in the venue. And actually, that conversation happened now.
I worked on something which was it was a non-accessible space, very non-accessible space. But as part of a festival, the questions we were talking about in the room was saying, is there an equal kind of offering for people that can't get into that space because it's subterranean? Can we provide other experiences, and can we have a rich enough range of experiences for people with accessibility issues on this occasion? That means that they're not losing out by not seeing that one thing 3 floors down. So yeah, it's a difficult conversation. It's not going to be easy actually for any of us, but I think there's lots of will to change out there, and there's lots of advice that we can go for, and there's lots of people that are very inspirational, people like Jenny and so on, that we need to draw from. So. Anything else?
Just I want to say one thing about proactive recruitment into our sort of technical side of things. The focus is very much on the audience. Are the audience be able to see it? Focus now is on very much on the performers. Can we make sure the performer get on stage? And I think for us to understand actually what it's like to be an aspiring lighting designer or an aspiring technical manager or a production manager or something like that, the only way we can do that is by actively seeking those with the talent, regardless, and actively trying to bring them into the backstage areas. That way then we'll find solutions, that way then, because we'll have to find solutions and problem solve, and that way then it won't be such a conversation because it becomes the norm. I'm talking long term there, but obviously, it's kind of at that recruitment phase. Do you need to know, if there's any access issues at the recruitment phase, because it's about the talent of the person you're seeing, and then you can all solve the problems later on.
Yeah, we are not a diverse group in this room.
Exactly. I mean, and now with intelligent lighting and things like that, maybe working at height will be a thing of the past, and various other things like that. So I just think we got ourselves drive it ourselves by the way we think and recruit.
Okay, thank you very much. Good, right, thank you very much indeed, everybody. I think the pub may be beckoning, so we'll wrap it up today. Have you got any other wrap-up points you'd like to make? Okay, next one is 6th of June, ABTT Theatre Show. Ali Pally again, I presume. Yeah. See you then. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.